think there's a huge level of toxicity when it comes to perfectionism. That's your insight. That's your goal.
I'm somewhat shocked by that statement.
I've got no idea what I'm doing, but I'm loving it. And it was the first time that I have had a panic attack, and it was full on. I don't think people are aware that they're doing it. It's a survival mechanism.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Growth Distillery, where we are talking to some of Australia's most prolific marketers around their unfiltered selves. I have the pleasure of introducing Catherine Bowe. Cat is the Senior Director of APAC Marketing for Salesforce. Cat's held a litany of senior executive roles across content, partnerships, marketing for some really serious global brands, including Meta, Airbnb, and Fairfax. You're a scholar and a former council member of the Marketing Academy. You've got a raft of vocational roles across ESG, including Greenpeace and the AANA, and have had numerous involvements in mentor programs. Beyond questioning how you find the time in the day, that is quite an A side, what we call the A side to you.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for joining us. We're really delighted to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
But what I would like to know is, what's the B side to that? Who's Cat? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So the B side, I am the youngest of 4 kids.
Okay.
And it is such a pivotal part of my being, because I just have all of these memories of trying to get a word in and trying to actually be noticed. And I am very fortunate to be the youngest sibling of 3 very, very beautiful, authentic, and impressive people.
Okay.
So they were incredible role models. But not only that, I'm a country girl.
Okay.
And that's something which is pretty surprising to a lot of people.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Griffith.
Okay.
So central New South Wales. Basically from Sydney, you head 8 hours west in the middle of the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, and family of farmers. And yeah, I was born and grew up there. But things get complex and complicated. And at 8 years old, my father committed suicide.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And thank you. And as a way of handling that in the 80s, there was so much shame around it that we kind of wrapped the family up and pretended like it never happened, didn't tell anyone, and moved from the country to Sydney. And so I kind of restarted. And this was I was 10 years old or so by this stage. And I was able to restart with a clean slate and not tell anybody about this huge shame that I had that was not just pivotal to my family, but it was pivotal. It was part of what I thought who I was as a person. And shit like that happens when you're a kid and you don't have the emotional awareness, intelligence, regulation to distill the difference between something that happened and it being your fault. And so it becomes an intrinsic part of who you are.
Yeah.
And therefore the shame becomes an intrinsic part of who you are. And I was given this incredible opportunity. I went to a great school. I had good friends. I was smart enough at school to be able to get away with not having to work too hard and it not being kind of noticed by anybody, and was able to kind of scrape through. I was able to focus on art. I was able to kind of like hide myself in kind of the art classes at lunchtime to really kind of manage the way in which I wanted to show up and what people actually saw. And it was really interesting because that really kind of, it really influenced who I am and certainly who I was early on in my career.
In what way?
It put a distinction there between who I was and who I wanted people to see. And it wasn't until I did TMA back in 2019 that I really kind of, heard the way of referring to it as being the mask. I didn't know about it as being a mask. I didn't even realize I was doing it. There wasn't the awareness that it was a sort of a conscious thing to survive.
Yeah.
It was a way of being able to hide and to be able to showcase instead a pretty high level of perfectionism when it comes to what I wanted people to see. And that's really lonely. And it was really challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine it was also very exhausting.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
Totally exhausting. And I didn't handle that exhaustion well. I drank and I partied and I overworked and I totally burnt out. I burnt out many times in my career because if you don't know how to look after yourself, you don't know how to stop. Well, that was the way that I handled it. I didn't know how to stop. I just kind of kept going. Yeah. And it led to some pretty early success because some people don't really care about how you looking after yourself. They care about the results, and it produced some things that got me far.
So if you were to reflect back, and let's start with early career then. If you were to reflect back on that time where you were still masking.
Yeah.
And I'd love, to be balanced, let's go both sides of the coin. What were the things on reflection that you think, how did that serve you well? And then I think more importantly, hindsight 2020, how do you think, what was the baggage that you carried with you in terms of that masking and how did that impact you professionally?
It's a hard thing to be able to articulate what served me well looking back, because now it feels so hurtful that I treated myself in that way, in that I was so scared to really kind of allow people to see who I was. And as a result, I was able to probably mirror people around me, especially senior leaders. I was able to jump onto what they proposed or dictated were the kind of the goals or the values that we should be following. And so I was probably a pretty good student, to be honest. I was probably a pretty good employee because I was really good at following instruction and doing that really well.
The focus on mimicry.
Yeah, there really was. But one, that's exhausting. And two, there's a real cap to that. You can't continue to do it for very long. But what I find kind of quite interesting and probably quite misunderstood with this kind of behavior is I don't believe that it is necessarily conscious. I don't think people are aware that they're doing it. It's a survival mechanism. It's something that I did from being a really young child. And so it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I really need to go and work on this. Yeah. This is really something that's holding me back. This is something that, I'm not fulfilling my potential because there wasn't that awareness that was there. And I think that I was a relatively emotionally intelligent person, and yet that came as such a huge surprise to me.
Glaring blind spot.
Yeah, it really was a glaring blind spot. And it wasn't until I did TMA, it was actually our first boot camp. And, so here was I feeling like all super proud of myself. I'd been accepted. I was one of the few people, the 30 people in the cohort for that year that got accepted. Was feeling great. And one of our first days in the boot camp, we're sitting around in this session where we have to give ultimately our backstory to everyone else. And I had a panic attack, and it was the first time that I have had a panic attack, and it was full on and it was really confronting and it was scary. And there was nowhere for me to run and there was nowhere for me to hide and there was no need for me to go anywhere. But it ultimately was the process of going, this isn't serving you anymore, and taking it off and going, what's underneath and will anyone like it? And that was petrifying. And once you do that, you can't then put that back on.
And I suspect you might have been pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think everyone else was too. I think there were some people, certainly in my personal life, that obviously had seen underneath that. And they were like, I don't understand why you were hiding anyway. Yeah. So I think it was, pleasantly surprised is a great way to put it.
Yeah. And it is it's such a burden to carry that shame, as you said, particularly things that we carry with us from our childhood. Let's take a forward-facing view. Since then, right? What have been the strategies to help you manage through that now, and what are the things that you might look for in your teams to support them? If there are team members that might be crossing that same chasm.
The things that I do to support that now is I am a huge believer in growth and that being kind to yourself and allowing there to be this acceptance that you are forever changing and forever growing and being quite generous with your treatment of yourself, but also with others. I learned this great technique several years ago. It's called generous assumptions.
Okay.
And the idea of it is that rather than assuming that someone is acting with malice or bad intent or whatever it might be, especially, and this is probably the most pertinent and probably the clearest to understand if you're thinking about it from a stranger's perspective. Someone cuts you off in traffic, right? And instead of kind of responding with road rage in regards to kind of all of the obscenities that could go through your head, the idea of generous assumptions is what could that person be going through that has kind of led to them acting in that way. And it's a shift. It's quite a conscious perspective shift to how you approach people and things and people's behavior. But it also reminds you that we are very full, complex people. And what we know about someone's life is a tiny, tiny part of it.
Yeah.
And so not to assume that someone is doing something to hurt you. They're not doing something because they're an idiot. They're not doing something because they're ignorant. They're doing something because that is the best decision that they've got at that point in time. And let's give them some grace.
I think that's such an amazing mindset to have. I'm always surprised by how often we are surprised by the kindness of people, right? Just it's a bit of an ugly face that we wear, that we've got such low hopes for humanity that I was surprised that people were welcoming. I was surprised that people were so inviting or accepting of this this cross that I bear, so to speak. And to your point, God forbid that person that cuts you off has just gotten a call from the hospital and they're on their way, right? That is certainly a philosophy that I've tried to internalize within my life as well. And I think that we should all be so lucky to see people a little bit more glass half full.
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the ways in which I try and practice that is doing regular check-ins with my team, for instance. So with the beginning of every team meeting, rather than going through the to-do list and going through the red flags and going through the things that we need to work on, we will always start with a check-in. And that is to go around and people can share what they would like to whatever degree they would like. I believe that everyone is entitled to their own level of privacy in what they're going through. But they're able to, it gives them permission and lets them be seen as being whole people. So for instance, in my team meeting yesterday, I explained to my team that my 2-year-old twins are currently toilet training and it is just a headache that I don't need when I'm 6 weeks into a new job and I've got this big event and I'm like, but it's something where it's a real thing. And it's hilarious.
It is.
And it is frustrating and it tests patience. And it allows my team to see me as being more than someone who's asking them about a deadline, as someone who's actually juggling lots of different things and can laugh at the small bits of it too.
I can certainly resonate with that. My claim to fame is the one and only mid-board meeting nappy change.
Oh, great.
Middle of presenting to the board and in strolls my then 3-year-old with an urgent need to relieve himself. And you know what? You've just got to, and I think that this is one of the amazing silver linings, if there is such a thing from the last few years that we've had around the pandemic, that we've started to see the human side of all of us.
We've started to see inside people's houses and the fact that, there isn't that there isn't that distinction in regards to kind of the suit and the family person. There's, it is all one and the same.
All right, let's go all the way. Let's go from early career right to where we are now. If I were to go and speak to your team or the teams that you've recently led, and you weren't in the room, and I said, look, who's Kat as a leader? Like, give me the 3 thematics that make Kat who she is. What do you think they'd tell me?
They would tell you that I really strove for creative excellence.
Okay.
That
What do you mean by that?
To kind of to stretch an idea. I like to stretch a project. I like to think outside the box. I like to think of different ways of being able to approach a problem. Often it's grounded in insights, and it's grounded in sometimes even in data in regards to what's going on. But it's about sort of that creative excellence. How can we convey this message or change this opinion or explain whatever it is in a different way? And I like to challenge there to be a, I guess, sort of some creative thinking around that.
Okay. I presume that in that skill, right, to stretch your team like clay, bigger ideas, bolder ideas. And I think that that's a profoundly important capability in a senior marketing leader. What's the dark side to that?
I am not great with process.
Okay.
Not great with
You're
process.
You're in good company there.
I'm not great with the often the rigor which goes into the blocks and the process, the project management that goes into building that idea. I have enough of a concept of it that I am aware of where there can be points within a project that you can pivot and that you can change, critical kind of milestones. So it's not just being a pure creative that's just kind of hell-bent on an idea regardless of how we get there. But it is, I'm not the person, like, for instance, I've never been great at checking copy for an ad because, like, I'm talking like the full stops and the capital letters. I'm not great with kind of this tiny level of detail. I'm great when I think about a campaign. Yeah. I'm great when I think about a concept. I'm great at how can we make someone feel. But when it gets to kind of this fine level of detail, I hire people who are exceptional at that, and we balance each other out.
Okay, so we've got the big ideas, right? The value that you play to your team is to really shatter the box, right? There is no box, big, stretchy, bold, creative. What would be the second thing that they would say?
Would be about growth.
Okay.
Endless growth.
Relentless
growth. And it can be exhausting for some people. Okay. It can be exhausting to be around. It's certainly exhausting when people kind of hear about what I'm up to and what I'm doing and the amount of different kind of projects that I'm working on. For me, I find it really energizing to be reminded consistently that there is so much that I do not know. It could be through podcasts. It could be through what you watch. It could be through what you study. It could be from just the way in which you approach something that you may have done 20 times. Let's look at the things that we may not know. Let's look at what we can learn through how this has happened previously. So it's more a mindset of kind of trying to examine the stuff that we can learn from an experience. And I think that one of the traits of success is not necessarily having kind of fine-tuned skills, but it's the ability to learn. And it's the agility to be able to pivot and to be able to learn different skills, to learn different traits. I've just started a job at a company where I've never used their products before, and I've got to learn all of that. But I haven't been hired because of my skills within their company. I've been hired because of the the experience that I've got with solving problems, with getting creative excellence out of a team, with being able to look at problems differently and creatively, and to be able to communicate and engage with an audience in a way which is probably not expected from a big enterprise.
I think you touch on something that I often see with executives, the fallacy of being hired because you're the expert in everything. And knowing the role that you play, to your point, I've actually been hired for these really stretchy skill sets, not necessarily because I've got deep product expertise.
That's right.
As someone that shares your unquenchable thirst for knowledge and growth, what do you think, again, that there's a sting in the tail there, I suspect, certainly something that I've had to work on in my time for those that might not share, said unquenchable thirst. What do you think that is?
I think it is not sitting still and not giving yourself the time to reflect and to be
and consolidate that knowledge.
Consolidate that knowledge. And it's interesting. I think COVID taught us 1,000 things about who we are as individuals, as communities. And one of the things that surprised me that I learned throughout it was I'm much more of an introvert than what I had thought.
Okay.
I'm
somewhat shocked by that statement. But
well, I thought that I was kind of this. I'd always been someone who I'm comfortable in social situations. I was someone who was kind of like always out. I was quite comfortable in those scenarios, and being forced to spend more time in sort of the quietness. And I realized how much energy I was getting from that. And it's little shifts. So, for instance, now I practice yoga because it reminds me to breathe slowly and deeply, as opposed to CrossFit and running marathons where it's about kind of this consistent kind of pursuit for faster, quicker. Come on, let's go. I don't need
more of that.
I don't need more of that.
Yeah.
I actually need the balance of that. I need to be reminded to slow down. I need to be reminded to be aware that not everyone is working at the same speed as you. And to breathe and be in the moment. And that has been a huge blind spot in my career up until probably 2020, where I just kind of thought, look, we're on the ride, jump on, let's go. Like this is how we get to greatness. This is how we get to excellence. This is how we get the project done. But not everyone works in that way. And actually it wasn't working for me either. Yeah. And it was really unsustainable. As I mentioned, I've suffered burnout several times in my career, but not since then.
Yeah. And do you think that growth mindset is a hallmark of great leadership? Or what impact do you think it has on leaders?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential. And I think that there are various parts of a growth mindset. I think that the way that I think about it is there's a humility to knowing that there is more to learn than what we already know.
I love that. I love the fact that that in your mind, a growth mindset is actually the keys to a humble and authentic approach to leadership. And I think that that's a profound insight. I think
it is essential. And I think that humility is something which is also really misunderstood. I don't think it's about standing on a stage and humbly accepting an award for the recognition in what you have done.
How many humbled and privileged posts we see.
I don't believe that is an accurate definition of the word. And I don't think that humility means a lack of confidence. And I don't think that it means being unsure of what to do. I think it's about being aware that there is stuff that you don't know, being self-aware of where you are, being conscious of what has brought you here to where you are, and and the various different kind of aspects that brought everyone else and what you can learn together. So I think that I think it's complex. And I think that having a true growth mindset is about acknowledging that complexity. And I think that's how you kind of untangle it and try and learn more from it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we've got the creative agent. We've got the job is never done with learning. What will be the third and final thing that your team tells me about you?
I think that final thing that they would say is I want people to be the best versions of themselves.
Okay.
And with that it's not kind of jumping on a perfectionist, because I think there's a huge level of toxicity when it comes to perfectionism.
Okay.
But
go deeper into that.
Well, I think that one of the problems with perfectionism is nothing's ever good enough. And that you can get obsessed about details that actually don't matter and that don't actually kind of move the dial anywhere on anything. As opposed to done is better than perfect. And I think that done is good. I think that being able to get work, learn from it, get work done, learn from it, look at the mistakes, be very open and acknowledge that there were mistakes that were made. There were things we could have done better. There is always something that you could do better.
Yeah.
Acknowledge that. Don't hide it. Don't hide that away. Don't remove that from the report when you're sharing it in your QBR. Put it out there. Lead with that. Yeah. That's your insight. That's your gold. This didn't work because it could have been the wrong time. It could have been the wrong color. It could have been the wrong format. It could have been the wrong host. It could have been the wrong product. It could have been whatever. But acknowledge that. Even if you don't understand it. And so I think the idea that I want people to be the best versions of themselves. I want people to lean into what their strengths are. And I think certainly early on in your career, I think you need to have a bit of a go at various different things to be able to test that out. I don't know, I think we're all wired pretty differently. I didn't know what I was good at growing. I didn't fall into it. I discovered it because I tried lots of different things. And there were some jobs that I've had that was such a wrong fit that I have felt it in my gut. And I just knew this is not me. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not happy. And I was getting paid really good money to do these jobs. And I'm like, I don't want it. And it was a visceral feeling inside. And then there were other things where I'm like, I've got no idea what I'm doing, but I'm loving it and I'm curious and I'm excited and I want to figure it out.
So, Kat, this realization that you've really got to focus on what fills your cup to be nourishing. When in your professional career did you come to that realization?
I came to that realization probably during the Marketing Academy, to be honest, realizing that surviving burnout continually wasn't a way to be able to manage my career.
Not particularly sustainable.
It wasn't particularly sustainable. And it also wasn't a necessary path to a career, that there was a balance in between and there could be this nourishment of yourself as well as the career that you have. One of the things that I really is really important to me is the support that I provide to my team in regards to them as full people, and whether that is through things that they learn, whether it's through them as parents, whether it's through giving some very honest and kind feedback. I think that feedback is something which is often really misunderstood. I think people often take it too personally because it can be confronting.
Yeah. Our egos are fragile little things.
They are, and they certainly can be. But I had a real shift in the way in which I approached feedback. I had this exceptional manager several years ago, and she was fabulous at giving feedback, but at first it was hard because I was getting it all the time. It was just consistent. I was just like, and I'm like, am I just not doing my job right? Like I just feel like I'm not living up to expectations. And I shifted the way in which I thought about the feedback, and rather than take it personally, actually heard what was being said and started to apply that feedback. Whether that was around being more prepared for something, whether it was about applying more rigor, which is something which is not a strength of mine. I like big ideas. How am I going to measure it? Well, if it's something that you're not great at, then you need to be able to find a way to be able to complement that, because you can't just ignore it just because it's not something which is a skill of yours. So being able to hear that feedback and to hear it then and now, for me as a leader, to be able to provide it in a way where it is being delivered with a very clear intent to help somebody reach their potential, to be able to reach the expectations in which the organization has of them, that you're there to coach, that you're there to support. You're not there to criticize. You're not kind of pulling at weaknesses. You're there to help someone grow. And I think that is something which is a hallmark of really good leadership, but also something which is a really misunderstood skill. We live in kind of this world where we kind of have these 360 reviews, and we have compensation plans, which are all based on how we're performing. And so people feel like they may be good at giving feedback. One, we've got egos, and that needs to be managed. And we've also need to provide this psychological safety to be able to hear that feedback in a way that is taken on board, and you feel like, okay, well, if that's something that I need to work on, how are you going to support me in doing that? And what are the next steps? Not just kind of dropping a bomb and walking out the door.
I really, really love that philosophy. I think whole of person leadership, as sort of you've articulated it, is an incredibly underinvested skill set, and this particularly, given blended working and everything that you and I have spoken about over the last that have been the impacts of the last 5 years, this idea that our lives are compartmentalized, that there's a work cat and a home cat, and your leader's going to work on the professional version of cat, and there's not going to be this membrane where there's interchange. I think often does a lot of great leaders a disservice. So I think that's a wonderful philosophy, and I think that would be a great hallmark, as you said, of good leaders. All right, last one from me as we wrap up what has been, I think, a very generous and a profound conversation. So thank you for your generosity of insight. If you could go back 10 years or 15 years, you can pick the time, and give yourself some advice, knowing what you know now and what will set you up for success, not necessarily just professional success, but successes however you want to frame that, what would you tell yourself?
One is that it is okay to not know everything. And in fact, if you're in a room and if you're the smartest person in a room, you're in the wrong room. That you don't have to pretend to know everything. You also don't need to strive to know everything. It is okay to figure it out and to be quite open with the fact that you're figuring it out. And I think with that process, you can find your own voice. And with that, I mean, what's the uniqueness that you bring? What's the secret sauce that you bring to something? Everybody has something, everyone. And it takes a moment, it takes a second. I don't know, maybe some people are born knowing it. I don't believe so. I certainly wasn't. I certainly didn't 15 years ago. I didn't know what my secret sauce is. But once you know what that is, and you've got an idea when you're in a project with lots of different people, and you're like, you know what I'm good at? I'm good at understanding things that are super complex. I'm good at making sense of a really huge matrix structure with varying different kind of goals, and we need to find a strategy of how we get from here to there. How are we going to get there? I'm actually pretty good at
that's
being
my jam.
I'm pretty good at being that sort of that wayfinder and finding our way through it. So it's finding that secret sauce, knowing that you are probably, I would like to tell myself 15 years ago, you do have a secret sauce.
Okay.
You don't need to mimic someone else's. You don't need to, you can admire, absolutely. And you can be respectful, and you can, and you can learn something from other people's secret sauce. But you've got your own, which is unique to you. And be curious. Try and find it.
Kat, thank you again. For your bravery in being so open and honest with us, but as I said, I think you've been very generous with your insight, and I've truly appreciated having a chat to you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sam, for having me.